Yes, sir. 1212. I am back and with another edition of the studio session predictions. And of course, this episode, as I mentioned before, I'm going to be covering the Moments card. Floyd Money Mayweather, Marcos Maidana taking place May 3rd at the MGM Grand in Las Vegas, Nevada. I'm going to be covering two of the fights that are going to be on this card. There's four fights on this card, which is obviously the main event, Mayweather-Maidana. We also have Luis Collazo facing Amir Khan. We also have the return of Adrian Broner facing Carlos Molina Jr., not the 154 Carlos Molina, and J. Leon Love facing Marco Antonio Parabin. Overall, the card itself is okay to me. There's only really two fights there, which is the ones I'm going to be covering, that I'm going to be speaking about. But before I get to that, I'd like to first say that based on this card and based on the fact that, and again, I've mentioned this to some boxing writers that I frequently speak to and you know, just people in general. And considering the fact that Floyd Mayweather signed this big lucrative deal with Showtime, and you know, he's a Showtime fighter, and he's coming off the biggest selling pay-per-view in history. I mean, if you add the numbers up with Canelo Alvarez, it sold a 2.2 million buys, and you know, money-wise, it did more than the Oscar fight, because obviously, you know, pay-per-view purchases, or the price has gone up since 2007. So, you know, when you do the math, it did make more money than the De La Hoya Mayweather fight. I threw out the option, or, well, I mean, it's not my decision, but I threw it out there to say, you know, considering Floyd Mayweather is really the biggest name in the sport. I mean, I wouldn't call him the anchor in a say. I mean, there's, you know, he's not the life and death of boxing, but at the same time, he is the focal point. And I think for boxing to be back on a main stage, a huge platform, I think this would have been a great opportunity for this card to be showcased on CBS prime time. Now, in the era of pay-per-view and the era of how money is made in boxing, that's obviously something that is incredibly tough to do, and in a sense almost impossible to do. But I just think at this point, man, Floyd Mayweather has run out of opponents. I mean, let's not front, man. I mean, Canelo Alvarez was a fight that a lot of us did not believe was going to happen that soon. But as they always say, you got to strike while the iron's hot. And being that the Robert Guerrero fight maybe didn't do as well as expected, they had to go for gusto. So now when you look at the landscape of what Golden Boy and Showtime have as far as opponents for Floyd Mayweather, in reality, this is almost, and this is in the sense of you thinking that Floyd's last fight is going to be next September of next year, not this year. Is this just the parade for Floyd Mayweather? Is just, you know, these fights are just going to be $50-60 million fights for him, and you know, he should be able to beat these guys rather soundly. There's just no competition out there for him at this moment, for the sake of a big name and for the sake of it making a big event. Manny Pacquiao has a fight against Timothy Bradley where I've made my prediction on it, but you know, that's a you don't know type of fight. It really is. So if in the case Manny Pacquiao does lose to Timothy Bradley, I think this could be his swan song. You know, his you know what they say, the swan song, or the last hurrah for Floyd Mayweather. I mean, this could just be his parade, sayonara, because there's really nobody out there for him to make a big event for, unless he's gonna go up to middleweight. But why would he do that? So he's fighting Marcos Maidana. Amir Khan seemed as if was the initial choice, but considering Amir Khan's last fight with Julio Diaz last year didn't really prove to us that he's any threat or challenge to Floyd Mayweather, they had to strike while the iron was hot, and there was no hotter guy with around the 147-pound division than Marcos Maidana, after, you know, he beat rather soundly Adrian Broner, who was the next up-and-coming guy that they were trying to paint as the next Floyd Mayweather, foolishly. So it makes sense why they're going again with, they're gonna pick, or they picked Maidana for this fight. And funny enough, Amir Khan is on the undercard of the Floyd Mayweather fight anyway, which it's so hilarious to me, because it's almost as if Amir Khan is literally on his knees begging for a fight with Floyd Mayweather. And at least for me, and again, this is my prediction for the fight. I mean, I think Floyd Mayweather is going to beat Marcos Maidana. And the interesting part though is, he apparently told Amir Khan, "You're next." But the first prediction I'm gonna make is not, I've already, obviously, I think Mayweather is gonna beat Maidana, but I'll go into detail as to why. But Luis Collazo versus Amir Khan, when I read that fight was announced, I started laughing and I started thinking, okay, who are the matchmakers in this scenario? Because look, guys, I have a funny feeling Luis Collazo is gonna be once again the spoiler in this situation. Look, Luis Collazo is a guy that I believe has gotten the short end of the stick throughout his career. He's fought the likes of Shane Mosley, he's fought Ricky Hatton, he's fought Andre Berto, and at least 2 out of those 3 fights I thought he won, meaning the Hatton and the Berto fight. He just came off a second round knockout victory over Victor Ortiz, who, mentally is probably not the sharpest tool in the box as far as being a professional boxer is concerned. But you cannot ignore Luis Collazo's skills in this fight, especially with how Amir Khan looked a year ago. Remember, Amir Khan hasn't fought in almost a year. And by the time he fights Luis Collazo, it's going to be a year removed from his fight with Julio Diaz. A guy who was a 135-pounder coming up to 140, who gave Khan all the fight he could have. I mean, Khan did win the fight, but he got dropped in the fight and was on the stanky leg again. And I just think that Amir Khan is he's past the whole prospect viewpoint of him. We were looking at him like 4 or 5 years ago as this come up, fighting Malignaggi, fighting Marco Antonio Barrera and all these guys, but he's a veteran now. And I just think in his biggest fights, he's come short. Whether he's won the fight or he's escaped the fights, there's something about him that always leaves your eye open for maybe what some people call the inevitable, him getting hit with a shot and him getting dropped. I think this is a very dangerous fight for Amir Khan based on how he fights, because I think Amir Khan is a very good 4-5 round fighter going in, as far as him taking advantage. As you notice, as the fight goes on, and even in the Danny Garcia fight, it ended a little earlier than that, he tends to get reckless. He tends to put too much trust in his speed. And look, at 147, we don't know where his power is at. He's really never fought a legitimate welterweight. Luis Collazo is a legitimate welterweight with decent power. Now, I don't think he has solid power, but you got to remember, Amir Khan doesn't have the greatest chin. So, even for somebody like Victor Ortiz, who's been dropped, I mean, we've seen him be able to get dropped and come up and gather himself a little bit. With anytime you clip Amir Khan, man, I mean, it's dire straits. So, adding the fact that Amir Khan hasn't fought in a year, and I think he's also I personally think he's gonna be looking over Luis Collazo, because he wants that Mayweather fight. He wants that big money fight, and I think that's gonna be a huge mistake against Luis Collazo. What Collazo needs to do is really fight his fight. I mean, again, and he's also a southpaw, which is gonna add another dimension too. And like I said, the experience and the skill set that Luis Collazo has, I think could be very troublesome for an Amir Khan who may be a little apprehensive, or excuse me, who might be a little maybe looking past what's in front of him. And I think that's what's going to happen May 3rd. And I'm picking Luis Collazo to win this fight. I can't pick a knockout or not. And I'm afraid for him to get screwed in this fight. But something tells me that he's going to legitimately beat Amir Khan. and once again become the Apple spoiler. Now, will he get a fight with Floyd Mayweather? I don't think so, but I truthfully, I think this is a dangerous fight for Amir Khan. I really, really, really do. And I'm not basing this off of solely off the Victor Ortiz knockout. You know, you have to look at the intangibles with Amir Khan too. He has not fought by the time he fights Collazo, over a year. And he looked like shit in his last fight. And you can only base a fighter on his last fight. You know what I mean? So, I got Collazo in this fight, man. I know a lot of people are picking Khan just like off GP, but I'm gonna go with the spoiler in this one, man. I'm going with Luis Collazo. I'm gonna go with decision in this fight, but I think it was a kind of shaky matchmaking by Golden Boy. But then again, it's like, what other options do they have? So let's skip over now to Mayweather versus Maidana. Again, I think this is a fight that Floyd Mayweather should look incredibly good in. I would not be surprised if Floyd actually gets a stoppage late in this fight. Marcos Maidana is tough as shit. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I think Marcos Maidana is a guy who he'll fight you until like he can't fight anymore. As he proved against Amir Khan, when he got dropped, he got back up, and as the fight progressed, he was able to get closer and closer and closer in quarters with Amir Khan until he clipped him. Floyd Mayweather's just in another stratosphere, man. I mean, the movement, the defense it's gonna be so hard for Marcos Maidana to really land clean. Now, you know, you could look back at the Broner fight, and again, this will show you the difference in skill sets between Adrian Broner and and Floyd Mayweather. Floyd Mayweather's Philly shell and that defense that he does so much more. I mean, one thing he does that Broner doesn't use is he uses his waist. He uses he ducks, he dodges punches. It's not like he has the Philly shell and he's just bobbing and weaving. There's more to it than that. On top of the fact that Floyd's timing, just his punch selection, the way he goes about figuring these fighters out so quick, and he takes all your assets away so early in a fight that for the rest of the fight you're not necessarily trying to survive, but you're just trying to hang in there with him, you know. And I think this will be the same type of scenario for Marcos Maidana. I mean, I think he'll make a good effort. And maybe I think he'll land some shots on Floyd. I don't think it's gonna be a super virtuoso performance by Floyd. I mean, I think he's gonna look incredibly good, but I mean, I think Maidana's gonna land shots throughout the course of the fight. But when all is said and done, I think we're gonna see the same Floyd Mayweather with the speed, the timing, the movement, the defense, and it's all gonna play into how he fights. So I expect a clear, unanimous decision. I would not be surprised for a knockout, but with Floyd is not going to get out of his comfort zone if he doesn't need to. So I'm expecting a 12-round unanimous decision, maybe 11-1, 10-2, maybe for Floyd Mayweather. So as far as I'm concerned, I'm a little reluctant to buying the card, and I've bought pretty much every Floyd Mayweather pay-per-view minus the Marquez fight, but this fight just doesn't appetize me. So I'm still gonna watch it, in my own way. But again, I'm actually looking forward more to the Collazo versus Khan fight. And as far as the other fights are concerned, I mean, I think Broner should win, and I think Jay Leon should win as well. And we'll see what happens with those guys coming up. But as it stands right now, I got Collazo by decision. I got Mayweather by decision. Do those two fight in September? I don't think so. Who does Floyd fight in September? We will see. So stay tuned. I'll be back with my Cotto versus Martinez prediction, and I'll be back. Peace.